Hello, my name's Sheehan, and I'd like to talk to you about Mozart's 41st Symphony, the Jupiter Symphony. And I'd like to particularly focus on the structure of this symphony. I do believe that having some understanding of the structure, particularly in classical music, does aid with its enjoyment and appreciation. Mozart composed this, his last symphony, in 1788 in Vienna, hot on the heels of the 39th and 40th symphonies. And it's always been viewed as something of a crowning achievement, even in a body of work as highly regarded as Mozart's. There's a brilliant exuberance about this symphony. It's filled with memorable ideas, ingeniously developed, including the use of counterpoints, most famously in the finale. And although Mozart didn't give it the nickname Jupiter, that name somehow encapsulates the grandeur and the power of this music. It's in 4 movements. The first movement's in sonata form, as is normal with a classical symphony. And here's the first subject. Note the balance in this opening idea. We have this fanfare, followed by this gentler idea. Then upper fifth, we have the fanfare again, and this gentler idea again. There's a thrust and a corresponding retreat, an equilibrium in this music, which of course is a hallmark of classicism. We eventually get to the transition, which is based on the first subject with the addition of a descending scale. Which in due course takes us to the second subject in the dominant key in G major. And this begins with this charming melody. The second subject is really a group of ideas. There's at least 2 ideas. We move into more dramatic territory with this one. Eventually that takes us to the Codetta, which I think is one of the most marvellous melodies Mozart ever wrote. It's based on an earlier aria, and it goes like this. A wonderful melody. It always makes me smile when I hear that. That takes us to the end of the exposition, which is then repeated. Then, with the beginning of the development, Mozart stays with that Codetta theme, and in a marvellous sleight of hand, he takes us down to E flat major. So, in a very simple but effective way. And then he stays with this Codetta theme for most of the development. Eventually he uses it in stormier waters. We hit G minor here. Then Mozart tries to throw us off with a false recapitulation with that fanfare first subject again, but it's in the wrong key. We're in the subdominant rather than the tonic. Just before we hit the real recapitulation, there's this climax, which I think is really effective, where we have the first violins playing this. Then underneath that, we have these quirky offbeat chords adding to the drama. Together, that makes such a kind of dramatic climax to that development. That tees us up for the return of the first subject for the recapitulation. We have the transition, the second subject again, this time in the home key, and then that one last time to enjoy that marvellous Codetta melody. The second movement, in contrast, is incredibly serene for most of it. There are a few ripples, but generally it has this poise about it, like a classical, an ancient Greek statue. The first subject is in F major. It's in sonata form again. The first subject goes like this. Eventually we reach the transition, which is one of my favourite moments in this symphony. It's an achingly beautiful melody in the minor mode. It goes like this. Hear a bit more of that later on. We then come to the second subject. Again, serenity is the key word. That's followed by a Codetta based on that second subject, but with the addition of what sounds like distant hunting horns. And I think this is a marvellously evocative moment. It reminds me of perhaps being in a stately home garden on a beautiful summer's day with the trees and the birds, and then in the distance hearing these horns come over the fields. It's really quite wonderful. Then we have the development, which is solely based on that beautiful transition theme. Mozart takes us through various keys. Follows then is a sequence based on that, which I think is really beautiful. We eventually get back to the first subject. This time, a very short statement of it. Mozart then, as soon as the first subject's begun, he started the transition, which is different this time round. He's developed the first transition from the Exposition so much, he bases this transition on the first subject, but with the addition of these delightful demi-semiquavers in the violins, which is a wonderful ornament. They're like strings of pearls almost. We then have the second subject in the home key, the Codetta with those distant hunting horns, and then we have what we think is an afterthought by Mozart. We have this Coda based on the first subject. So we have a return to the serenity of the opening, apparently Mozart, it wasn't part of Mozart's original plans for this movement. It's a moment actually which had a great impression upon Felix Mendelssohn when he heard this music for the first time. After this wonderful second movement, we have the minuet and trio. As is usually the case in a classical symphony, it's in an A, B, A section structure, a ternary structure. And each section's based on a descending chromatic scale. We have in the minuet itself, the A section, this melody. Then it carries on, still with that descending idea. Eventually, the A section is repeated. We move into the trio, the B section, the bit in the middle. But the texture thins right out here. We have this. And then we have this kind of Sturm und Drang chords, darkening the mood momentarily. That takes us to the end of the B section, which again is repeated, and then we're back to the minuet, a reprise of the minuet, the A section. If the 41st Symphony, Mozart's last symphony, is seen as a crowning achievement of his symphonic output, the finale of the 41st Symphony could be seen as perhaps the jewel on top of the crown. It's justly famous for its power, its energy, its dazzling display of Mozart's genius. It's in sonata form, but it's just crammed full of at least 5 ideas. The first subject, it consists of 2 ideas. Here's the first one. That crops up throughout the piece. Then we have this idea, almost baroque in its splendour. That second idea, that just recurs in every section of this sonata form movement, so listen out for that. There follows a transition based on that. We do have the addition of this new idea in the transition as well. And then we have that idea from the first subject again. That takes us to the second subject, and this goes like this. Then we have this other idea in the second subject group as well. And we have this extra idea as well. There's so much in this short movement. That's almost there. Then we have the Codetta, which again is based on da 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 da, but it's turned the other way round. It's going up instead of down. All of that in an extremely short exposition, so dense with musical material. Then we have the development, which is based on that first subject. Da, 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 da. Starts off in the minor mode, and the texture's interesting in this development. We have this canonic texture where half the orchestra's out of step with the other half, and it creates a tremendously exciting effect. We have based on that descending idea again. And one of my absolute favourite moments happens in the development. We have these busy strings going, and then we have these. It's like almost like a Lutheran chorale has suddenly infiltrated this dense texture. That happens a couple of times. It's a wonderful moment. I think it's absolutely brilliant. We eventually hit the recapitulation. First subject, transition based on that, with that. Second subject, that one, and then we go on. We hear everything again, Codetta, and then we reach the end of the Codetta, and something funny happens. Mozart adds a kind of linking passage at the end. You think, oh, what's going on here? I thought the symphony had finished. But no, Mozart takes us to the joyous coda of this symphony. Indeed, perhaps the coda of his whole symphonic output. And in this stroke of genius, every melody you've heard so far in this final movement of the symphony, at least 5, are combined in this fugal, contrapuntal tapestry of sound. Everything you've heard is simultaneously played. It's absolutely remarkable, absolutely brilliant. Something J.S. Bach would have been proud of, I'm sure. We hear the combination of those themes briefly, and then the symphony just heads to this glorious rush at the end and finishes in a blaze of glory. Please have a listen to this symphony, even if you know it well, and just perhaps be sensitive of the structure as you listen to it. I really do think it makes such a difference, and just have a listen to this brilliant music. Thank you for listening, and hopefully this has helped.